My son told people I was losing my mind. Not once, not in a moment of frustration, not as an exaggeration that slipped out at a dinner table and was walked back the next morning. He said it deliberately, strategically, to specific people in a specific order, because a father who is losing his mind is a father whose concerns can be dismissed, whose objections can be explained away, and whose assets can be managed by someone more capable. He said it to my doctor. He said it to my financial advisor. He said it to my neighbor. He said it to the pastor at my church. He said it at a family dinner in November in front of my brother and my sister-in-law and 2 cousins who stopped returning my calls within 3 weeks of that dinner. For 2 years, the people around me stopped listening. And for 2 years, I had been recording every conversation since January. All of it. Every phone call. Every visit. Every careful, well-practiced expression of concern from my son about whether Dad was really managing out there alone. The recorder was a small digital device the size of a pen, and I carried it in my shirt pocket every single day, and nobody ever noticed it, because a man people have already decided is losing his mind is not a man they think to look at too carefully. I want to tell you what was on those recordings. But first I need you to understand what I had built, and what he was trying to take, and why a man who told his father's doctor that Dad sometimes doesn't know what year it is needed me to not be credible before he could finish what he had started. Welcome to Dad's story. If you are new here, stay through this one. Hit that like button, drop a comment telling me where you are watching from, and let's get into it. My name is Arthur Pendleton. I am 71 years old, and I live in Savannah, Georgia, in the Ardsley Park neighborhood, in a house on Washington Avenue that I have owned since 1991. Before that, I lived in this city my entire life, which in Savannah means your roots go into the ground the way the oak trees do, deep and slow, and wide enough that you stop noticing how far they reach until someone tries to cut one down. I spent 40 years as an accountant. Not a glamorous profession, not the kind that gets mentioned at dinner parties with any particular excitement, but the kind that teaches you things that most people do not learn until it is too late. It teaches you that numbers do not lie when you know how to read them. It teaches you that the gap between what someone says and what the documents show is where all the important information lies. And it teaches you patience, the specific, meticulous patience of a man who is prepared to sit with a spreadsheet until it tells him the truth, however long that takes. My wife, Dorothy, passed in 2019. Lung cancer, never smoked a day in her life, which is the kind of detail that still makes me angry when I think about it too long, so mostly I try not to think about it too long. We were married 44 years. She was the kind of woman who remembered everyone's birthday without writing it down and who kept a prayer list in her Bible with every person she was currently interceding for. And when she died, there were 63 names on that list, including 2 people she had never met but had heard were going through something hard. My son, Randall, is 44. He lives in Savannah, 20 minutes from my house, with his wife Cheryl and their 2 teenage boys. Randall works in commercial property management, handles a portfolio of small shopping centers and office parks across southeast Georgia, and has always had the particular confidence of a man who is good at his profession and occasionally confused that with being good at everything else. I want to be fair to the Randall I raised. He was a good boy who became a decent young man and who, somewhere in his 40s, made a series of financial decisions that created a gap between the life he presented and the life he was actually living. And when the gap got wide enough, he started looking for a bridge, and the bridge he settled on had my name on it. I did not see it coming. Dorothy would have. Dorothy had a way of reading a room that I have never possessed, a kind of social sonar that detected things below the surface while they were still too small to see. She would have caught the shift in Randall 18 months before I did. She would have mentioned it to me gently, the way she mentioned things she wanted me to notice, but did not want me to be defensive about, and I would have probably told her she was reading too much into it, and she would have given me the specific patient look she had for that situation, and she would have been right. She was gone by the time Randall started talking about my mind. It began subtly enough that I wrote it off as concern. A comment to my doctor at a routine appointment that Randall attended in the fall of 2021, that Dad has been forgetting appointments lately. Has he mentioned that to you? I had not forgotten any appointments. I had missed 1 dental cleaning in 8 months, because I had scheduled it on the same day as Dorothy's memorial anniversary and realized only that morning that I did not want to spend that particular day in a dentist's chair. One missed appointment in 8 months. Randall described it to my doctor as a pattern. A month later, a conversation with my financial advisor, a man named Stuart Burke, who had managed my retirement accounts for 12 years and who called me afterward, somewhat awkwardly, to let me know that Randall had come by the office alone and asked about the process for adding a co-signer to the accounts in the event that a client experienced cognitive decline. I want you to sit with that. My son went to my financial advisor's office without telling me and asked how to get his name on my money in the event that I experienced cognitive decline. He did this in November of 2021. He did not mention this visit to me. Stuart Burke mentioned it to me instead, because Stuart Burke was the kind of financial advisor who still believed his job was to work for the client and not the client's family, and he wanted me to know. I thanked Stuart. I sat with what he had told me for 2 days, and then I went to a small electronics store on Abercorn Street and bought a digital voice recorder, a small and unremarkable one, the kind that fits in a shirt pocket and runs for 14 hours on a single charge, and I put it in my pocket and I did not take it out. That was January of 2022. What I recorded in the months that followed was not dramatic all at once. It accumulated the way water accumulates in a low place, slowly, daily, until the level is undeniable. Phone calls where Randall asked questions that seemed like concern but were structured like information gathering. Visits where he moved through my house with the specific observational quality of a man taking inventory. A conversation at Christmas dinner where he told my brother Gerald, just loud enough for several people to hear, that he was worried about Dad driving, that there had been some incidents, that he was trying to figure out what to do. There had been no incidents. I drove myself home from that Christmas dinner and sat in the driveway for 10 minutes before going inside, not because I was disoriented, but because I was thinking. Because I was 40 years of accounting sitting in the front seat of a paid-off Buick, adding up figures that were starting to form a shape I recognized. In February, Randall brought Cheryl to my house on a Sunday afternoon and sat me down at my own kitchen table and had what he described as a hard conversation. He said he had been talking to Dr. Hennessy, my primary care doctor. He said he had been talking to Stuart. He said he had talked to Pastor Williams at Calvary Baptist, who Randall had apparently visited specifically to discuss his concerns about his father's mental state. He said the people who knew me and cared about me were all saying the same thing and that he needed me to hear it. He said, "Dad, you have not been yourself since Mom died. We are all worried, and I think it is time we started making some plans." His voice was measured and kind. Cheryl's hand was on the table near mine. The whole thing was performed with the care and precision of a man who had thought about how it would need to go and had rehearsed it accordingly. The recorder was in my shirt pocket the entire time. I looked at my son across my kitchen table. My kitchen, the table Dorothy and I had bought at an estate sale in 1994 and which had hosted 44 Thanksgiving dinners and 3 generations of homework and more Sunday morning conversations than I could count. I looked at my son, who was telling me that the people around me had all agreed I was not myself, that plans needed to be made, that things needed to change. I said, "I hear you, son, let me think about it." He looked relieved. He squeezed my arm. He and Cheryl stayed for another hour, during which Randall mentioned twice, casually, that it might make sense for him to take over the management of my accounts just temporarily, just to take the burden off me, and once mentioned that the Washington Avenue house was probably more than one person needed, and had I ever thought about something smaller. The recorder got all of it. When they left, I called my brother Gerald, not to process the conversation emotionally, to ask him directly what Randall had said to him at Christmas and whether anyone had contacted him since. Gerald told me Randall had called him in January and expressed concern that I might not have the capacity to manage my affairs much longer. Gerald told me he had meant to call me about it, but had not wanted to upset me. Gerald told me hesitantly that Randall had mentioned something about potentially needing legal guardianship if things progressed. Legal guardianship. My 44-year-old son had discussed the possibility of legal guardianship over me with my brother in January, 4 months before the Sunday afternoon kitchen table conversation where he told me everyone was worried. He had been building a case, not with doctors and legal filings yet, but with people, with the network of relationships around me. With the slow, patient construction of a consensus that, by the time anything formal happened, would already be in place, would already be the thing everyone believed, would already have made Arthur Pendleton into a man whose own assessment of his own situation could not be trusted. I sat in my living room that night with Dorothy's Bible open on my lap, not reading it exactly, just holding it, the way you hold something that belonged to someone when you need to think. I looked at her prayer list. 63 names. Mine was on it near the top. Arthur, she had written, clarity. She had been praying for my clarity. I do not know when she wrote it. I do not know what she had seen that made her write it, but I decided to honor it. The next morning, I called a lawyer named Margaret Osei, whose office was on Bull Street in Savannah, 2 blocks from Forsyth Park. I had known her name for years without needing it. She had a reputation in this city as a woman who did not lose cases involving the protection of elderly clients' rights, which was a specific enough reputation that I had always privately hoped never to need it. I needed it. I sat across from her desk, and I placed the recorder on the surface between us, and I said, I have 14 months of recordings. I need you to tell me what they mean. Margaret Ose looked at the recorder. She looked at me. She pressed play. She listened for 40 minutes without stopping me. If you are still with me, drop a comment below. Hit that like button. Because what Margaret Ose found in those recordings when she went through them properly is where this story turns into something neither Randall nor his lawyer ever expected to be sitting across from. Margaret spent 2 weeks going through the recordings with a paralegal whose entire job was transcription and flagging. They went through 14 months of audio, every conversation, every visit, every phone call, and they produced a document that was, when printed, 112 pages long and organized by date, subject, and legal relevance. I want to tell you some of what was in it, because the recordings did not just capture Randall's campaign against my credibility. They captured things he said that told the full story of why he needed that campaign in the first place. The first significant piece was a phone call from March of 2022, a call I had initiated to discuss the quarterly review of my accounts that Stuart Burke sent every 3 months. Randall had called back within the hour, and the recording captured him saying, before he knew the recorder was running, something into what sounded like another phone or a room where Cheryl was present. It is him, just give me a minute. And then his voice shifted into the register he used with me, warm and slightly careful. And in the background, before he moved away, I heard Cheryl say the words, ask him about the Washington Avenue valuation. I had not asked him about the Washington Avenue valuation. He had not asked me. But someone had told Cheryl to make sure he did, which meant someone had already been thinking about the valuation of my home on Washington Avenue in March of 2022 while I was calling about an unrelated quarterly statement. Margaret flagged it yellow. A lot of what she found got flagged yellow, meaning relevant and worth keeping. Some things got flagged red, meaning significant and potentially actionable. The Washington Avenue valuation comment was flagged red. The second significant piece was a recording from June, a Sunday dinner at Randall's house, the kind of family occasion that I attended because family occasions were something Dorothy had believed in, and I was still honoring her belief in them even when I found them difficult. The dinner itself was unremarkable. What happened after dinner was not. I had gone to use the bathroom, which was down a hallway that passed Randall's home office. The door was not fully closed. The recorder was in my pocket. I heard Randall's voice low and specific on the phone. The problem is he is still too sharp, Randall said. Hennessy will not put anything in writing without more documentation. I need another 6 months. A pause. I know that, Randall said, but if we push too fast he will get suspicious and then we lose the whole thing. I have been building this for a year. Let me finish building it. Another pause. The house alone is worth $700 at current market, Randall said. And the retirement accounts are just under $900,000, a combined $1.6 million, and he is 70 years old with no one to leave it to except me and 2 cousins who live in Atlanta and don't know what day it is. If I do this right, this is clean. If I rush it, I lose everything. I stood in the hallway outside my son's home office on a Sunday in June, and I heard him say $1.6 million. This is clean if I do this right. I walked to the bathroom. I washed my hands. I walked back to the dinner table and I had dessert, which was a peach cobbler that Cheryl made very well, and I complimented her on it and meant it, because a man who has spent 40 years in accounting knows how to read a number without letting his face change. The recorder had all of it. Margaret flagged that one red with an asterisk. Do you know who he was talking to? She asked when we reviewed it. No, I said. The voice on the other end, she said. Did it sound like anyone you know? I thought about it. Through the door, through the recorder's pickup in my shirt pocket, the other voice had been thin and indistinct, but there had been something in the cadence of it. It might have been Stuart, I said. Margaret wrote something down and did not say anything for a moment. Stuart Burke, my financial advisor of 12 years. The man who had called me, somewhat awkwardly, in November of 2021 to let me know that Randall had come to his office asking about adding a co-signer. The man I had thanked and trusted with my accounts and continued to trust with my accounts because he had told me about that visit, which I had taken as evidence of his loyalty. What I had not considered was that telling me about the visit might have been a calculated move rather than a loyal one. That a man who was already in conversation with my son might have told me about it to establish credibility, to maintain my trust, to keep himself in a position to be useful to both sides at once. That the call I had taken as reassurance might have been a piece of a larger board that someone was playing more carefully than I was. Margaret made a call. She had a contact at the State Securities Division who owed her a professional courtesy. It took 4 days to come back, but when it did, it confirmed that Stuart Burke had been the subject of a client complaint filed in 2019, the details of which were sealed, but the existence of which was a matter of record, and which involved allegations of account management practices that benefited a third party at the expense of the account holder. A third party. I moved my accounts to a new financial advisor the following Monday. Margaret drafted the transfer paperwork, and it was done by close of business. Stuart Burke called me Tuesday morning and asked if something was wrong, and I told him I was just looking for a fresh start and thanked him for his years of service and hung up. The recorder caught that call too. 3 days later, Margaret filed a complaint against Stuart Burke with the Georgia Secretary of State's office, citing the 2019 sealed complaint and the June recording as grounds for a formal investigation into whether Burke had been acting in concert with a family member to facilitate a transfer of a client's assets without the client's knowledge or consent. That complaint landed on a Thursday. On Saturday morning, Randall called me. His voice was different. Not the warm, careful register he used for the kitchen table conversations, something tighter, something that had lost the particular confidence of a man who believes he controls the pace of events. Dad, he said, I got a call from Stuart. Did you? I said. He said there was some kind of complaint filed, something involving his office and our family. I said, do you know anything about that? Let me ask you something first, I said. In June, at your house, Sunday dinner after dessert, who were you on the phone with in your office? A silence, long enough to be its own answer. I was checking on something for work, Randall said. 1.6 million, I said. That is what you said, 1.6 million, and if you do it right, it is clean. The silence after that was a different quality entirely. The silence of a man who has been moving pieces across a board for 2 years and has just realized that someone has been watching every move. Dad, he said, and his voice had dropped to something almost unrecognizable. Dad, I need you to understand. I understand everything, I said. I have understood it for 14 months. I want you to call your attorney, Randall, and I want you to have him call Margaret Osei on Bull Street. She has something for him to listen to. I ended the call. I sat in Dorothy's chair in the living room, the wingback one by the window that she had claimed when we first moved in and that I had never been able to think of as mine even after she was gone. And I looked out at Washington Avenue and I breathed in and out for a while. Hit that like button. We are getting close to the part that closes this story the way it needed to close. Randall's attorney was a man named Philip Kaur, who had an office on East Bay Street and whose reputation was for commercial property disputes rather than anything involving elder law or estates, which told me that Randall had chosen his attorney the way people choose attorneys when they do not yet believe they need a specialist, when they think the situation is under control and they just need someone to make a phone call. Philip Kaur called Margaret on a Tuesday afternoon. Margaret told me about the call that evening. She had put her phone on speaker, which was legal in Georgia, and she had played him the June recording, the one from the hallway outside Randall's home office, the one where my son said 1.6 million, this is clean if I do this right. Philip Kaur listened to that recording and was quiet for a long time. Margaret told me that quiet lasted 43 seconds. She had counted. Then Philip Kaur said, I am going to need to speak with my client before we continue this conversation. Margaret said, "Of course. I will also need you to know that we have 112 pages of transcribed recordings, 14 months of documentation, 2 flagged instances of specific coordination between your client and a third party who is currently the subject of a formal complaint with the Georgia Secretary of State, and a forensic accounting review of Mr. Pendleton's accounts going back 30 months that I would like your client's financial records to be made available to compare against." Philip Kaur was quiet again. "I have to be honest with you," he said finally, and Margaret told me his voice had changed in the way voices change when a person recalibrates. "My client did not fully brief me on the nature of this matter when he retained me. I suspected that might be the case," Margaret said. "I am going to need several days." "You have until Friday," Margaret said. "At which point I file in Superior Court, and this becomes considerably more public and considerably less manageable for everyone involved." Philip Kaur said he understood. He called back Thursday morning. He had apparently spent 2 days doing what attorneys do when they discover that the case they have been handed is not the case they were told it was, which is to say he had read everything Margaret sent him, listened to everything she had provided, and had a series of conversations with Randall that I was not present for, but which I could reconstruct from the agreement that came out of them. Randall agreed to the following: a formal written acknowledgement that Arthur Pendleton was of full legal capacity, and that any representations made to the contrary to any medical, financial, or personal contacts were inaccurate. A letter to be sent by Randall directly to Dr. Hennessy, to Stuart Burke before his license matter concluded, to Pastor Williams at Calvary Baptist, to my brother Gerald, and to the 2 cousins in Atlanta, correcting the record on my cognitive state and withdrawing any previous statements suggesting decline. A formal cessation of any and all actions related to guardianship or account management. And a sum of money, agreed upon between Margaret and Philip Kaur, representing damages for the 2 years of reputational harm and the cost of the defensive legal and investigative work I had been required to undertake. I am not going to tell you the exact number. I will tell you that it was sufficient. I will tell you that Margaret called it appropriate given the documented scope of what had been attempted, and that Margaret Osai's threshold for appropriate was not a low one. I also want to tell you what Randall did not agree to, because this part matters to me more than the agreement itself. He did not apologize, not in the agreement, not in the structured legal language of the settlement, and not in the phone call he made to me the day after everything was signed, which was a call I picked up because I had picked up every call from my son for 44 years, and I was not going to stop out of anger. He called and he said, "Dad, I want to talk." I said, "I am listening." And for 20 minutes, my son talked, not in the careful, rehearsed register of the kitchen table conversations, not in the measured voice of a man managing a situation, in something closer to the voice of a boy who had made a very large mistake and was not yet sure how to be the person who had made it. He told me that the debt had started with a development deal that went badly in 2020, that it had compounded through the pandemic. That by the time he started talking to Stuart, he was past the point where he could see a way out that did not involve something he did not want to name directly even then, that he had told himself it would work out, that I would not notice, that the plan was clean. He used that word again, clean. "It was not clean," I said. "No," he said, "it was not." "You told my doctor I did not know what year it was," I said. He was quiet. "You told Pastor Williams I was declining," I said. "You told Gerald. You told my neighbors. You built a version of me that was small enough to manage, and you did it while I was still sitting at my kitchen table with Dorothy's Bible on my shelf and 60 years of perfectly clear accounting in my head." "I know," he said. "You told people your mother's husband was losing his mind," I said, and that was the sentence that finally cracked something in his voice, because whatever he had told himself about what he was doing, he had apparently not framed it that way. We were quiet for a long time after that. I'm not going to tell you that I have forgiven him, because forgiveness is not a decision you make once and file away. It is a practice, like accounting daily, line by line, and I am still in the early pages of that ledger. What I will tell you is that I have not closed the account. I have not written him off. I am 64 years of fatherhood sitting in a wingback chair in Savannah, Georgia, and I know that the person who did what my son did was not the person I raised, but a version of him that fear and money and bad decisions had built over several years. And I know that a structure built on a bad foundation can be torn down and built again if someone is willing to do the work honestly. Whether Randall is willing to do that work is something I cannot know yet. It is something he will have to show me, line by line, over a period of time that I am not going to put a deadline on. What I can tell you is that Philip Kaur called Margaret the week after the settlement and told her, off the record, that in 20 years of practice, he had never heard a recording like the one from the hallway outside the Home Office, and that he genuinely did not know what to say to a son who had said what Randall had said, and that he hoped Arthur Pendleton was doing all right. I told Margaret to thank him. I told her I was doing fine. It is April now, a Tuesday, the kind of Savannah April that makes the whole city smell like wisteria and cut grass, and I drove myself to the cemetery this morning before breakfast the way I do on the second Tuesday of every month, because Dorothy is there and because I still have things to tell her. I told her about the recordings. I told her about Margaret Osei. I told her about Philip Kaur going quiet for 43 seconds. I told her about the settlement and about the letters that went out to Dr. Hennessy and Pastor Williams and Gerald and the cousins in Atlanta. I told her about the phone call from Randall and what he had said and what I had said back. I told her I had moved her prayer list to the inside cover of my Bible, next to where my own name was written. Clarity. I told her I thought she had gotten her answer on that one. I stood at her grave for a while in the April morning, and I thought about 40 years of accounting, about the thing it had taught me more than anything else, which is this: a number does not change because someone needs it to be different. A fact does not become something other than a fact because someone has decided it is inconvenient. The truth is a load-bearing structure, and it holds what it holds regardless of who would prefer it did not. My son needed me to be less than I was. He needed me to be diminished and confused and easily managed. He needed the version of Arthur Pendleton that he had been carefully constructing in the minds of the people around me to be the real one, because the real one, the one with the recorder in his shirt pocket and 40 years of reading what the numbers actually said, was not manageable at all. I drove home on Washington Avenue. I parked in the driveway of the house that nobody is taking from me. I made coffee. I sat at Dorothy's kitchen table and I opened her Bible and I looked at the prayer list with 63 names on it. I added one, Randall, give him the courage to build something honest. Dorothy would have written it on the list a long time ago. She always did see things before I did. Some lessons take a recorder in a shirt pocket. Some take 44 years of marriage. And some you carry in a Bible on a kitchen shelf and open when you need to remember what you are actually building and why. The house is mine. The accounts are mine. The records are clear and documented and 112 pages long. And for the first time in 2 years, when people call me, they know exactly who they are talking to. That is enough. That is more than enough. If this story stayed with you, drop a comment and tell me which moment hit you the hardest. Hit that like button, subscribe if you are not already here, and I will see you in the next one. And if someone around you is trying to make you smaller than you are, start paying attention. Write down the dates, keep the records, because 40 years of accounting will tell you the same thing every time. The numbers do not lie, and neither does a recorder in a shirt pocket. Dad's Story uploads every week. Subscribe and hit the bell so you never miss one. There is one more thing I want to tell you, and I held it back until now because it belongs here at the end rather than in the middle of everything else. The week after the settlement was signed, I received a call from Dr. Hennessy's office. Not from Hennessy himself, from his nurse, a woman named Patricia who had worked at his practice for 20 years, and who I had always liked for the way she remembered your name without looking at the chart. She called to say that Dr. Hennessy wanted me to know that he had received Randall's letter and that he was sorry. Not a formal medical apology, not something documented in a file. A personal sorry. He said he should have spoken to me directly rather than allowing a family member's characterization to influence his clinical notes. He said that in 30 years of practice, he had never had a patient's family member describe cognitive decline so specifically in the absence of any clinical evidence, and that in retrospect, he should have found that specificity suspicious rather than convincing. He said he had updated my file to reflect my full cognitive capacity. I thanked Patricia. I sat for a moment after the call. Then I picked up my pen and I wrote Hennessy's name on a piece of paper and I sat with it. 30 years of practice and a family member's specific story had been enough. That is what I want you to carry away from this piece of the story, not the legal settlement, not the 112 pages of transcription. This, that a prepared, persuasive, loving-sounding son, speaking in the right tone to the right people, had been inches away from succeeding, had been 6 months from succeeding, by Randall's own account on the recording. Another 6 months, and the documentation in Hennessy's file might have been enough for a guardianship petition. Another 6 months, and Stuart Burke might have had enough on paper to argue that account transfers were in my best interest. The recorder in my shirt pocket was not a sophisticated piece of equipment. It cost me $42. I charged it every 3 days. I pressed play every morning when I put it in my pocket the way you press play on anything important. And it became, over 14 months, the difference between a man whose life was taken from him and a man who took it back. I want you to think about that the next time you feel like something is happening around you that you cannot quite name. The next time someone's concern sounds slightly too organized. The next time the people you trust seem to have all arrived at the same conclusion without quite explaining how they got there. Document it, date it, keep the records. Because a man with 40 years of accounting in his bones and a $42 recorder in his shirt pocket is not, as it turned out, a man whose mind is going anywhere. He is a man who has been watching the numbers this whole time, and the numbers do not lie, not now, not ever. If you are watching this and something in it felt too familiar, I want you to know you are not alone. And I want you to know that the truth, kept carefully and documented honestly, is a load-bearing structure that holds long after the people trying to take it apart have given up and gone home. Hit that like button one more time. Subscribe if you haven't already. Drop a comment below and tell me one word for what you felt when Philip Kaur went quiet for 43 seconds. I will be in the comments reading every one. Dad's story, every week. Because some things need to be said out loud.